All right, welcome everybody to the Wednesday edition of Rates and Barrels. You know, this is not Derek VanRiper's smooth, dulcet tones. This is Eno Sarris. I'm going to do my best to. I'm already screwing this up. I can feel it. I'm losing it. I'm losing the plot. I need to talk about our guest today, Jed Lowrie. Thank you so much for coming in and giving us your knowledge about baseball. What are you up to in real life these days?
Man, I'm too many things, doing a lot of traveling, hanging out with the kids, trying to get through the end of summer, be productive, get them to some camps and then playing a little golf, enjoying the weather.
Yes, you've hit some legendary courses this year. What's the best? What was the highlight course of the year?
Oh man. So earlier in the year, I went to Hawaii. I got to do Nanea, which was pretty special. And then I recently got to play, went up to Central Washington and played Gamble Sands. Actually, I've got the Scarecrow hat on today. They opened up a new course. David McClay Kidd has done both courses up there. It's out in the middle of nowhere, but once you're there, it's a pretty special place. And then I got to play a couple courses out in New York this year, played Sleepy Hollow. And then I got to play one up in Rome called Tayujiga, which is it's an original Donald Ross course that hasn't been touched by anybody else, which makes it one of the few of those left. So, yeah,
I love that
golf.
you know who designed the courses. That's a little bit of golf nerdery. That's pretty cool. Do you have a favorite golf course designer?
I don't know. I've got some, I've got someone I look at Bandon Dunes. I look at like Tom Doak, what he did at Pacific Dunes. Pretty special place. So I don't know if I would say
what he does. Like what would like how if you just got put on a course and it was his, like how would you know it was his?
Yeah, I guess I don't know enough Tom Doak courses, but I like Tom Fazio's guy that I've played a lot of his courses. He always makes it fun, and there's always like you can tell there's different ways to approach the green with Fazio. Like he just there's some sort of slope that you can run it down to, or just I guess more approachable, scoreable holes. There's some of his original stuff is pretty special.
That's so cool. That wasn't on the rundown, by the way. That was just a little contemporaneous stuff.
Riff.
Yeah, if you want to talk golf courses on the Discord, you can join our Discord. If you want to hear more of this, you can like the video and subscribe. We will get into the news now. We have got some interesting news here in Pittsburgh. Bubba Chandler is up. And finally, he hasn't been doing that well in the minor leagues. In AAA right now, Bubba Chandler has been putting up good strikeout rates, but the rest of the line is a little bit of trouble. A 27% strikeout rate with a 12% walk rate and a 4 ERA. It's just not what we expected from the very top of the pitching prospect heap. The sourcing here says that he's going to be a bulk starter for a little bit before he moves into starting. The model says that you can see here that he's got high stuff on the fastball and the slider. The curve's all right. He's had a little bit of trouble with fastball command. I think that's why you've seen the walk rate expand at AAA. They've done this already with Braxton Ashcraft, where they've taken a guy in the major leagues, 1 inning, 2 innings, 3 innings, and 4 innings. It's almost like a spring training in season. I kind of like this because, you use all your pitches and just pitching in the major league seems like such a different beast than pitching in the minor leagues. So, get used to dominating. Find out what your dominant pitches are, right? That's 1 inning. 2 innings is like, can you pace yourself? 3 innings is like, okay, I might have to see a guy second time. What do I do a second time? So you it's almost maybe the old Earl Weaver used to do this. Do you have any thoughts? I know you were a hitter, but do you have any thoughts on breaking in a guy this way rather than, or maybe just having him just fail? Having him go out there for 5 and maybe fail. Do you think there's one way is better than the other?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the command really comes in, because at the major league level, you have to be a starter, you have to be able to beat guys in the zone. You just don't, like, to your point with, like, you face a guy 2 times, and then if you get to that third time through, and if you're not consistent in the zone and have the stuff to beat people in the zone, it sounds like he's got above average stuff with the strikeout numbers that he has. But you're not going to get as many swings and misses out of the zone in the major leagues that you would in the minor leagues.
Yeah, so that's going to be key. One reason I have for optimism, even though the model does not like the changeup that much, and weirdly says the changeup is worse against lefties. I don't know why. That's Stuff Plus has these splits, and it's like, don't throw the split against lefties. So I think maybe maybe the changeup is not that great. If that's the case, the changeup is not that great. There's a slider curve combo. The curve actually looks like it could be a weapon against lefties, and the location numbers on the slider are good, but you can still get keyholed, right? Like, let's say you just can't put the fastball anywhere, but you can't put the slider anywhere, then anybody in a 2-0 count is going to sit slider because they know you can't put the fastball where you need it. So you can still get keyholed if you only have one pitch you can command.
Yep. No, that is very very true, and especially depending on the release point and how well the term tunneling, like how well he tunnels those pitches. You can have a breaking ball with really sharp break and really high spin rates, but if it doesn't come out of that same tunnel, it's not as effective.
Especially the curve, I think. I mean, sliders. I don't think you can have a good slider if it doesn't look like your fastball.
Exactly.
But the curve, the curve, you can be a model pleaser. You can be something that works in the minor leagues, and then you bring it to the major leagues. My biggest example is Logan Gilbert had a curve that was the reason he was great in the minor leagues. He was part of all of his write-ups, his prospect write-ups. He thought that was his number one pitch when I talked to him in Modesto. He comes to the big leagues, and everyone tells him through hitting, that's not a good pitch. We can see it. It's the hump or whatever it is, the release, whatever it is. That's not a good pitch. He's come all the way back around where now he throws a knuckle curve. He throws really hard. That looks completely different than his original curve, but he's found a decent one. So that might be part of what Bubba Chandler has in front of him. For fantasy, it's hard to pick up a guy that may not start next week and may just pitch twice for 4 innings. So that's something to think about from that angle. There's a little will he, won't he back and forth going on in the New York media. It's a lot of fun. Aaron Judge, so Aaron Boone says, he probably won't be 100% throwing this year. I guess that's part of a conversation of like, how are you going to work your lineups? Ben Rice, Giancarlo Stanton in the outfield. How are you going to deal with all these pieces? And so I think he was probably just saying, this is something we're going to have to deal with all year, but then somebody went to Aaron Judge and said, hey, he says you're not going to throw at 100% this year. And Aaron Judge says, I don't know why he said that. That was his quote. I don't know why he said that. I think I will be. It's there. Okay. So there might be something underlying, which is not great, which is that, maybe the manager and the player aren't on the same page on something. That's sort of maybe an underlying thing. But I think that even if they had talked to each other, you can come away from one conversation with different feelings. Like two people can have a conversation, go separate ways, and think that's what I think just happened. The other person says that's what I think just happened, and and so for Judge, I think anything he thinks about is going to be tinged with optimism because he's the player, and he says, "I got this. It doesn't hurt." Right now, I'm going to get there. I can do this, and anything from the manager's perspective is like, what is this crap I got to deal with? So like, he's thinking about like, what do I have to deal with this? How do I have to get Stanton in the lineup? How do I do that? And stuff like that. So I don't know if it's a big deal, but you've experienced some of this where like the team's saying something differently than you're saying. So
sure.
What should people think about? Like, what do you think Aaron Boone should have done differently, or just should he not have talked about it, or what? Like what?
No, I mean you can't not talk about it. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the player is going to be optimistic. I think maybe a conversation prior, like, what are we going to say to the media? May have been beneficial in this, because especially in that market, anytime there's something different coming out of the player's mouth than the manager's mouth, it's going to get, it's going to get overblown. And then they're going to start questioning, whether Aaron Boone has control of the clubhouse, based on a comment of him not, about Judge not throwing for the rest of the year, which, I seems silly to me, but that's kind of where this, where anytime those threads get pulled, they're just going to try to find something else and draw conclusions. So I don't put much stock into this.
This doesn't have to mean that there's something wrong.
Exactly. Exactly. It doesn't sound like it's going to keep him out of the lineup. And so, that at the end of the day, Judge is a very productive outfielder, but he's not there to run balls down. He's there to be the middle of the bat, or middle of the lineup bat.
Right. And that's just how they're going to have to get through this. I think, if you're thinking about keeper leagues or think about the future, I do think that the percentage likelihood that he has surgery is still fairly high. I mean, flexor tendon surgery, even if he was a pitcher and he had a flexor tendon strain, that is a precursor to Tommy John. That is definitely something that can lead to surgery. We're now having more flexor tendon surgeries to try to avoid it creeping up the arm and becoming a TJ surgery. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was off-season surgery on this one. And that's part of the conversation too. Like he doesn't want to think about that. He doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to be ready for tonight's game. So he wants to be optimistic and be like, I can throw, I can be in tonight's game, and then, I could be out there right now if you want to be.
And their best lineup is with him in the outfield as opposed to DH. Right. So, from a team perspective, you do want him out there.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has a surgery. And these types of surgery, if it's TJ, then even for a position player, it's 6 months. But we've seen Harper. We saw Harper play in the postseason, have TJ, and then he came back mid-season as a DH. So I think, if there is surgery, he might miss as much as 2 months early next year. But that's all speculation. I am not a doctor, and I have not seen any pictures of his actual injury. But I'm just saying that we've seen injuries like this sort of fester, turn into an actual surgery, and that's what's happened in the past. Speaking of surgery, Jake deGrom. Sorry, that's a terrible segue. That was mean. Jake deGrom, who is in the midst of one of his best seasons in a long time and looks really great and healthy, will have his next start skipped due to shoulder fatigue. They've already talked to Keith Meister and said that he's cleared. He does not have an injury. I wonder, this is not exactly where the news item is spending. And I know you're not a Hall of Fame voter. And I am, so maybe I shouldn't even be talking about this. But, I do think his Hall of Fame case is going to be interesting because it's so light on quantity, 1,500 innings. It's something, it's almost in between a closer's case and a starter's case, I mean, if he was a closer with 1,500 innings and a 46, wins over replacement, he would go right into the Hall of Fame. I mean, he would be. I think that'd be the best closer of all time, and in some sense, he has been sort of the best closer of all time as a starter. But in terms of wins, he has 94 wins.
But I thought wins don't matter.
Right. Yeah, I know. But to some voters, it will still matter.
I know.
But even 1,800 strikeouts is a pretty low number, but a 2.54 ERA, there's a little bit of this what ifness to it. How would you deal with that if you were a Hall of Fame voter? If you were like, this is a Hall of Fame talent, he was just sidelined by injury. Like, we can see every time he was on the field, he was a Hall of Famer. Would you just make that person a Hall of Famer? Like, had sort of a half of a Hall of Fame season career,
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a case to be made about bulk numbers, and I would love to see him stay healthy for a few more years, because I think if he stays healthy and puts up those numbers, I don't think anybody has a case against him, because to your point, like the peak years and what he did when he's healthy, surefire Hall of Famer, just in terms of the talent and the execution. But I would like to see a couple more years for him, both personally, being able to watch him work and pitch, but then also just to silence any of the potential naysayers that he's not a Hall of Famer, because there are a lot of guys who are really talented who didn't stay healthy that could have been Hall of Famers. I don't think I don't think that's this guy. I mean, if you, to your point, with a 48 WAR or 47.9 WAR, he's 37. But I with the way he's pitching this year, and I get it from a fatigue perspective too. If you just look at the innings pitched over the last few years, I mean, you're talking about the last time he was over 100 innings was 2019. So that's a big jump. He's already over at 140 innings. And it's really good to hear that there's no structural damage, that there's no injury, and it's just fatigue. And that makes perfect sense to me based on the workload that he's had the last few years.
Yeah, I think that the move makes sense to me. I hope there's a few more years of this kind of pitching. It is fun to watch him pitch because
oh my God,
it's such great stuff and great command. It's not one of these ones where it's great stuff without command, where it's a lot of pitches and you're slogging through innings. Like, he can get through innings with 4 or 5 pitches sometimes.
Yeah. And the mentality too. I think that's what that's just a presence on the mound. Like, if he gets up a hit, he just doesn't believe. Yeah, like, he just doesn't believe he should ever give up a hit, and he's probably not wrong.
Yeah, but in terms of bulk, just to give a little bit of context and put a bow on this, by Fangraphs WAR, he's behind Adam Wainwright, Oral Hershiser, Jamie Moyer, and Tim Hudson. Mm-hmm. A few good seasons could move him past that. If he can get to something like 50 wins, he gets up to Kevin Appier, Bartolo Colon, Cole Hamels at 51.6. So Mark Burley at 52.3. So it's not a good case by a bulk. And even if he had 3 or 4 more seasons, he'll come up short of Felix Hernandez, who's currently making his case and being voted on, and not. And I don't, he wasn't put in this last time. So we'll see what he'll be in a unique case when he gets there.
Yeah. And just one more, like, to kind of really put a bow on it too, is like, he's averaged 6.7 WAR per 162 games. The average Hall of Fame pitcher is 4.5. So it truly is just a matter of some bulk that, if he can add, the last couple of years, and his body holds up, I think he's a surefire, but he just needs a little bit more bulk to, because I think there will be a lot of writers that dock him because of the bulk or the lack thereof.
Yeah, well, you should have thrown slower, I guess. We've got an interesting thing brewing in Arizona, and I just think that this is. I thought we had to put this on the docket because we've had an episode this year about clubhouse cancers, and we just talked about potential fracture between a player and a manager with New York. This story in Arizona really has elements of everything where you're not sure from the outside exactly what's happening. Just to sort of catch you up, Ketel Marte took some days off. He took a day off right before the All-Star break and then was playing in the All-Star game. During the All-Star break, some money was stolen from some jewels and money was stolen from his house. And he took some days off to deal with that, unpaid days off, to deal with that. And while he was dealing with that, he was in the Dominican Republic and not in Arizona where the thefts occurred. This is also set against the backdrop of the Diamondbacks sort of faltering right before the trade deadline, which ended up being in a sell-off. And so Nick Picoro, who I enjoy his journalism, he does good work, wrote this piece that there was a strong reaction to. Some people called it a hit job. I found it interesting just because there are people saying these things, and so he should report them. If there are enough people saying these things, you should report them. And so he wrote a piece about people grumbling about his time's off and should they trade Ketel Marte. And one of the most interesting things in the piece to me was that Picoro writes that players who talk about Ketel Marte recently have added a phrase that he's a great player when he wants to be. And that's the type of thing that's out in the open, and something that you can see that's not necessarily just sourcing from behind, like somebody who might just be mad at Ketel. This is something that's out in the open and you can see it, and there's other people saying it. But then Perdomo comes to the rescue, and Perdomo, by all accounts, Geraldo Perdomo, the starting shortstop of the Diamondbacks, is an affable guy, a leader, a guy who can talk to both sides of the clubhouse. There's often sort of the Latin side and the non-Spanish speaking side. He's a guy on both sides of it. He said, in front of his manager, please, he just wants to play baseball. I don't want to speak as a teammate. I want to speak as a brother. He wants to play baseball. Just leave the guy alone. It's been too much for him. I feel he doesn't deserve that. Finally, Ketel spoke, and he said that I apologize for not backing that up. That's the only quote that I found in our story on it. That I guess what he's apologized. I have to sort of parse it. That's what he said. I guess if I'm parsing it, I'm saying he's saying like I should have backed up the reasoning. I should have told people what was going on. I should have communicated more. I didn't back up why. Like I didn't tell them I've been dealing with hamstring injuries. I didn't tell them the model says I should sit. There's so many parts of this. Like maybe training staff said this is a good sit day for you. Maybe the day before the All-Star game is a great sit day because then you get like 3 days off or whatever it is. And so there's a lot of moving parts here. But I guess one thing that I found fascinating when talking to you before the show was, let's say you're Torey Lovullo right now or Perdomo. What are the tools at your disposal to deal with the situation? Now, Perdomo's already used one, which is sort of the public statement of affirmation. We're standing behind our teammate.
Yep.
But there are others, like in terms of player only meetings or manager led meetings, or just just conversations. What are the types of things that you can do to repair? Because I would say the very thing that's obvious is that something is going on. There's some grumblings. Some people are upset about how Ketel Marte acts. And so what would you do about that situation if you're the manager or another player on that squad?
I think it's especially when you're talking about a veteran player who's, one of your higher paid guys and a guy that you're going to rely on. Like, I don't need those guys to be vocal leaders always. Sometimes personality just doesn't, and I don't know Ketel well enough to know if he, like in the clubhouse, if he's a vocal leader or not. But I do want my guys that are veteran guys to either be vocal leaders or lead by example. And so I would, if I'm Ketel and, this is going on, and to be fair, there has been a lot going on, right? Between some fan abuse, between robberies, and injuries, there is a lot on his plate. And so I'm assuming that, Perdomo is saying what he's saying because he knows what we don't know.
And maybe what his other teammates don't know.
Yeah, potentially. Potentially that, and so I think taking an opportunity to have a player meeting and Ketel kind of clear the air would be something that would be productive. I don't know if that is in his comfort zone or something that, he feels like would benefit the situation. But that would be something if I were in that clubhouse and this reporting is starting to happen and there's rumblings and, guys are kind of talking amongst themselves, I would want to address it directly. with everybody. So nobody got the wrong idea. If you already have your opinion, you already have your opinion, but I wouldn't want to leave anything unsaid.
So that's really interesting. I mean, I think that should be part of this. We may never know if it was part of this. Sometimes you do hear about player only meetings, sometimes you don't, because
you've
been in some player only meetings. I can't remember if I read about them. So the one thing I will say is, as a member of the media, the clubhouse is not super inviting. You're the sort of media members cluster together in a little bit of show of fortitude, like we are in your space. And so I don't know if that's coloring the way I see this, but I might find it hard to get up and say something in that setting. Now, as a player, it's your space, so maybe it's different. You're just like, no, this is my locker, this is our place, I'm on this team. But if you were young, I think maybe you wouldn't want to say something. So but like when you've had, and without, you don't have to do specifics, but when you've had these player meetings, have you felt like people were saying things, meaningful things that were hard to say? Were they taking advantage of the meeting to say things, or did you feel like it was just pretty much like pageantry that was like just done to be like, hey, we're all on the same page, right? Look around. Yeah. Okay, good. Like reading a statement and then everyone's like, okay, but still thinks what they think. Or do people sometimes actually air how they think? Would someone actually be like, yo, Ketel, it just looked like you weren't with us and that was when we needed you?
No, I once again, I think it comes down to the personality of the player and the type of message that they want to share. I've been in plenty of meetings that very, serious topics that could fracture clubhouses are addressed. And, the things that are said are very thoughtful. Like guys at this level have dealt with a lot of BS. And so the detectors are pretty high. And so if you get up there in front of, 25 other dudes and and if there are coaches or managers involved as well, and you say something disingenuous, it makes it worse, quite frankly. And so I think anytime you go
someone
into
someone might actually call you out on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe not in the moment. That I've never seen one where, you're getting called out in the moment on something like that. But it depends. Yeah. It just kind of depends on the situation. I mean, there are, there's a lot on the line in these clubhouses, right? Whether that's, young guys or somebody trying to make a career for themselves, older guys who, have made money that are, looking to extend their careers or, make the Hall of Fame or whatever. There's always something on the line, and it can get, quite frankly, it can get heated in there at certain moments when you don't feel like somebody has your back. And so, like I said, but the BS meters are high. And you have to be thoughtful about what you're going to say. And I think that this is, I think it's a legitimate concern when you have a player, especially as good as he is, if there's any perception that he is not doing what he's supposed to do as a team leader, like showing up and playing. But once again, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt because even the things that we do know seem like a lot, and there's probably things that we don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of the things that we don't know, I also look at this sometimes from, kind of like a media, so like studying the media, like sort of like, I'm not casting aspersions on Nick Pecoro and who he's talking to, but I do sometimes think like, who's the source, who gains from this, who might want this out there.
Sure.
And so you may, as a manager, be frustrated with the days off that you feel like you aren't asking for, that you aren't necessarily giving, that he's taking too many for some reason. So you may want this out there to be like, you're basically telling Ketel Marte through the media that like, hey, take fewer days off, that could be one. Another could be sort of, and we've seen this, we usually see this on the way out, but you could see this on the way before, laying the groundwork for a trade. when we saw Devers leave San Francisco, leave Boston, we saw a lot of comments, and I'm not saying that David Ortiz was being told what to say, but there was a few comments from different sources and, sort of casting aspersions on Rafael Devers' work ethic and, what he was like in the clubhouse and stuff. And so that was we see that a lot of times, sort of, telling people why you made the trade or sort of trying to make the trade make more sense to people, do you he's 31 years old. There hasn't really been a drop off in how good he's been. And he's on a reasonable contract. That's a $15 million per. I kind of want to rule that one out.
That one doesn't make sense. That one doesn't make sense to me because with Devers, was disgruntled, but he was still playing every day. He just didn't want to get moved around a lot, and it sounds like the communication could have been better. But this one, this to me, when you're not playing, if you're trying to trade somebody, you want to get them to play as much as possible.
Yeah,
right?
You don't want to emphasize that he's not playing.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That he's got an injury history or that he's dealing with.
Which is why you don't usually torch them before they leave town, right? You don't want to distress the value. So I mean, then the last one is just teammates, I guess, that were that felt that they were let down. And that's unfortunate, but I think communication is a big one. I think even if he doesn't get called out, and even if it's not natural for him, maybe he can do it in tandem with Perdomo. He could do something where he stands up with him, and he just says, here's the reasoning. Here's what happened. Here's the reasoning. Why was I in the Dominican Republic? Maybe because, I had insurance there. I didn't feel safe in my apartment. And that had just been robbed, or we had to have the insurance people go through there, and they didn't want us living there while they were going through it. Whatever it was.
Sure.
And I'm supposed to take periodic days off for my hamstring, and I thought the day before the break would be a good one because I get an extra day out of it. Almost like taking the day off before the day off.
Absolutely.
And I talked to the training staff, and I thought that was a good idea. So. Just sort of explaining it so that people can be like, okay, he's not a lazy ass. He's trying to maintain his hamstring and he had some issues. And then also maybe just because he's such an emotional guy, him standing up there, if it is difficult, I would say, I understand this is difficult, Ketel, but if you can do this, they will see how difficult it is for you and understand a little bit more about what kind of a person you are. And that's what Torey Lovullo was trying to get to. He also made a comment about he plays with his heart on the sleeve. He's a very emotional guy. And we saw that with the stuff with his mom. So, just getting up there and showing them hey, I'm a real human being, that these words affected, and I'm trying to explain my side of the story, I think would go a long way. So is that sort of
agreed? Does
that sort of describe kind of what the value of these meetings can be? Is sort of hearing directly from a player, something that's going on, and
Yeah, because I think everybody's dealing with something, right? And when it starts affecting the clubhouse or the game or the results, that's when I feel like it starts being addressable, right? Because you deal guys are always there supporting each other and talking through different situations. There's always there's family situations that are happening. There's wives, there's kids, there's travel, there's life. There's
legal,
life. There's life, and so those communications are happening between trusted parties within the clubhouse, and sometimes it can get clicky. But I think if you can come together as a team in a moment where something like this should be addressed, it just makes you stronger as a unit.
Yeah, I think you'd be more likely to maybe just talk to Ketel next time, and just ask him what's going on, as opposed to, react in the thing. But I do think, the highest paid player, or the highest producing player, I do agree with one of your original sentiments, which was just the idea that there is a responsibility there. Because of who you are. And there doesn't need to be one way to act on that responsibility, but there needs to be sort of an awareness of that responsibility. And so, even if you're a quiet guy, you could use Perdomo. Like you could use other people to sort of speak for you. Like if Perdomo's the guy who's bouncing around talking to everybody, just be like, explain to him why you're missing time. And then if somebody said something, your boy is lazy, like Perdomo can be like, nah, man, like this is a big plan to keep the hamstrings. Do you want him for 150? Or do you want him to try for 160 and get 130? You know what I mean? So you could like give your friends like sort of the way to talk for you, but you just have to be aware that this is going to be a thing. People are going to look to you the media is going to look to you for big comments after big games. And if you don't do that, then you're shifting that responsibility to someone else. Someone else has to step in and talk for you. They're looking for you to react if there's a big slump or, whatever, like to do something, maybe say something. They're looking for you if there's a controversy in the clubhouse to make a comment or to say something, or they're looking for you to just get out there and grind hard every day and be there and be in the cage, be wherever, like just to be a really hard worker. So there's different ways to be a leader, but like, you got to kind of pick one. If you don't pick one, that can lead to some issues, I think.
Yep. Agreed. I think that, you nailed it. I like I said, trying to try if you don't have that veteran guy that knows who he is at this point in his career, that it leads to potential fractures in the clubhouse. Because like I said, you just have to know that responsibility as a player. You said it well. So I agree. I think we're on the same page with this.
Yeah, I wonder, we're going to switch here over to a different clubhouse that's sort of establishing itself, the Baltimore Orioles clubhouse. And we're going to talk a little bit specifically about Samuel Basallo and Dylan Beavers being up and this lineup and what it can be. But I also wonder, you've been on some young teams that are trying to look around and kind of decide who's who. And I'm guessing that, without being in there, I'm guessing that Gunnar Henderson is to some extent the leader of this team, and that maybe just by happenstance and bad luck, the injury at the beginning of the season sort of, left a vacuum in the clubhouse, and also just talent that wasn't on the field. But do you have anything to say about sort of the feeling out process that can happen on a young team? Like, what if Gunnar isn't, a big talker, but Colton Cowser is, but Colton Cowser hasn't established the level of play yet where people want to listen to him. Is there any awkwardness on the way in on a young clubhouse where they're kind of sorting through who's good enough to be a leader? Because you can't necessarily be a leader if you're like the fourth outfielder. It's like, you can help, you can be glue, but
absolutely,
you're not going to be the one that the media goes to for a comment after the game. So right. How does that process work on a young team as they're sort of figuring it out?
Yeah, it's funny. When I first came up, the young guy, and I was also a part of a very veteran club. I think I was the only rookie on the Red Sox when I was there. And there was two young guys in Ellsbury and Buchholz who had, half a year the year before. And so kind of the expectation when I was coming up is that you're a young player, watch, learn, listen. Right.
Yeah. And, don't speak too much.
Yeah, exactly. Like you come out guns blazing. It generally backfires on you, like, cause the, other guys start rolling their eyes, and, then the veteran guys, they just, it wasn't looked at favorably.
Very different than today's Boston clubhouse, if you think about it.
Yeah. Very different. And I would say that now, the guys are coming up earlier. There's more turnover. Veteran. I feel like the veteran guy is viewed. I don't know how many guys had 8 to 10 years of service when I was a rookie, but I have to imagine there were quite a few of them. Now there, probably only a couple guys that are even close to 8 to 10 years of service in any given clubhouse.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, you come up, and I kind of got to the point too, where I wanted guys to come in, be themselves, and not there's a difference between being vocal or like showing your personality and being disrespectful. And I think I saw young guys who came up and thought they had it all figured out and, towed the line of being disrespectful to the veteran players who had been there and know what it takes and are grinding still to like get the job done. And young guys who came up and just had big personalities who were vocal, but you could tell that they weren't being disrespectful to anybody in there. They were just that's just their personalities. And the game will humble you. And so there were a few moments with young players that came up and didn't understand that your success in the minor leagues doesn't mean anything here, and nobody cares.
We were all great in the minor leagues.
Exactly. So, so there's some, there's some ways to address those types of, those types of players. And then, the other guys that you just kind of, you let them be themselves, right? Because I think you want them, especially if they're coming up and they're expected to help you win, which is really why they're there. They're not calling up somebody. Very rarely are they calling up somebody just to like fill a spot for a couple of days. That does happen. It
happens to relievers.
For sure. But position players, like you're coming up because there might be a spot to fill, but it's because the team thinks you can help win.
You can do something.
Exactly. So I would, that was always I want guys to feel comfortable, but I don't want I'm always watching that line to see if they're being disrespectful, right? Like comfort is different than disrespect.
Yeah, there's actually some quotes going around about Torey Lovullo talking about changing the culture in the clubhouse, and he focused on the comfort that you were talking about. He said, I can't really change the culture of the clubhouse with my words. I can't like go in there and make them be something that they're not. I can't go in there and be like rah 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 and like make them be rah rah rah. I'm paraphrasing here, but he was talking about like what I can do is create a space that's comfortable for them,
Correct.
And then have everyone be able to be themselves. So that sort of. It's interesting that he said that, and then also it fell apart on him a little bit. But we'll see. I mean, the people matter, and one thing that we have heard, at least I've seen in my reporting on the Orioles, is that they seem to value makeup, and that most of their guys are just really good guys, and that's what I've heard about Samuel Basallo. That's what I've heard about Gunnar and most of their guys, and most of my interactions with them, they seem to be very good guys. So I don't know if they're just really good. They do some really good media training, or if it's good makeup scouting. But they seem to, right when we think, oh, are they that good at producing good major leaguers? They're like, hey, we have two more. And they bring up Samuel Basallo and Dylan Beavers. And I just wanted to share real quickly. I did like a comp for Basallo where I just took, he has like top bat speed, 78 miles an hour. And so I basically just took the top like 20 guys in bat speed. Like that's his comps. And then I sorted them by tilt because he has a little bit of a flatter swing. And this is the list of comps here that I came up with. It's pretty exciting. I mean, even with some dings on here, Matt Wallner, Junior Caminero, Christopher Morel, John Kency Noel, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Kyle Schwarber, Jack Caglione, and Giancarlo Stanton. I added in the K percentage because that makes a really big difference when you're like Morel and Noel, and Wallner. Those guys are big K guys. It doesn't look like Basallo is going to be a big K guy. He's projected for about league average, maybe a little bit worse. He's had years with, where strikeout rate started with a 1, but the whole comp list has exactly the same bat speed, swing tilt, and K percentage as Basallo. And they, as a group, have almost a 15% barrel rate, 50% hard hit rate, average 92 miles an hour and have balls in play. And if you could say like, I don't think he's Noel or Morel or Wallner because of the strikeout rate, then you've taken most of the guys off the list. I mean, he looks like a dead ringer for Junior Caminero because they have this intercept that's way out in front, 36 inches. They have a flat swing. And they swing really hard. So he looks like a Caminero. But the guy that looks like Caminero is Jack Caglione, who hasn't started off as well. So I mean, there's you want to tinge every comp list with like the ups and the downs of it. But I honestly don't see him turning into like a Morel. Like this is not a 36% strikeout rate. There's no none of that in there. You saw something funny. We were looking at his page. It's just this is an aside. We're not body shaming here. This is just like, what did you say his weight was on Baseball Reference?
It's listed at 180, and I mean he's a big boy. I mean,
here's a picture of him just in case you.
I
don't think that looks like 180.
And when I was watching him, because I was looking at the scouting reports, and they had him at 70 arm. So I was watching him kind of behind the plate. There's some questions about his his blocking and some framing behind the plate. But as I'm watching him catch, I was like, man, this looks like Salvador Perez. He's just a big bodied catcher. That is, and then I look, I just caught my eye when it said 180, and I was like, I'm pretty sure, Salvi's not 180. But this kid, I'll tell you what, this is an easy swing. He's creating bat speed at that level with a very efficient move because it looks really easy, right? It's not easy. The effort level to produce that amount of bat speed is incredibly high. But when it's efficient, it becomes repeatable. And I think that's where I would agree with you on your comps that, like, even though the bat speed of Noel and Morel are high, you watch those two and it looks like they're trying to swing hard. When I watch Basallo, this looks like a very efficient, repeatable swing. And gets me excited. The guy is, he's got 161 extra base hits and 1,400 plate appearance, and 1,460 at bats in the minor leagues. He's driving the ball all over the place. Yeah. And I look at what he offers this club with that bat moving into the future. They got to be really excited about this kid.
Yeah, I do think, there's probably some question about his defense. They had a 30/40 future field on him over at FanGraphs. There's been, there's been some debate about whether or not he sticks a catcher, but I think that there's room on this team for a guy who catches, twice a week and DHs the rest of the time. And the bat, I think the bat's super special. So I would bet on this package, and I think that I guess the odd man out to some extent might be Ryan Mountcastle, who, is an old man for this group. He's already 28, just basically crumbling from dust. But he's been a good but not great player in the past. A 108 WRC plus as a right-hander with not great defense. I don't know if they'll be able to trade that, actually. So maybe it's I'm going to call it a platoon, but not a strict platoon, but a platoon of Mayo and Mountcastle at first. And then Rutschman and Basallo behind the plate, Basallo DHing, Mountcastle taking the days that Basallo catches. I think you can make that work.
I think part of my notes. Yeah, part of my notes were that, I think that he's going to hit his way into the lineup, and that, he just the fact that he has experience catching gives them that flexibility, right? That they could kind of pencil him in at catcher. I don't like to subscribe to the idea that anybody can play first base because it is a nuanced position, and it actually. You can cover a lot of blemishes with a good first baseman too around the infield. So, but once again, when the bat looks like this one does, you're willing. The whole idea, just drive in more than you give up, and I think this is the type of bat that can do that.
First base is actually really interesting to me because when you're talking about like on the field, like plays to first base. It's mostly just like a third base package, with fewer attempts, right? Because you have fewer lefties. And you don't have that many righties who are going to sting grounders like as hard as you can pull a grounder. So it's like easier than third base. But then you think about this, you're involved in every infield out, almost, right? So almost I feel like it's one of those things where, like, once you reach a shelf where you're getting the balls that are thrown to you, then it's fine. But you can be so bad that you're not getting the balls that are thrown to you that you should. And then you start costing all the rest of your infielders and just your defense in a major way. So I think it's one of those things where there's a shelf you have to make to. But he could make that shelf if they want to trade Mountcastle. If there was actually like a market for Mountcastle, then that could also be a way of doing it where you're like, hey, Basallo's our DH, Mayo's our first baseman, Rutschman's our catcher. Basallo's going to catch sometimes, but we're going to actually have Austin Jackson or Gary Sanchez behind the plate as well. We're going to have
Right. Well, sorry, I was just gonna. Yes, like before we get too far down that road, I just want to go back to like the psychology of having a good first baseman over there too, right? Of like freeing up your infielder.
You take that chance. If you're barehanding that ball and you're gonna flip it to first, do you think oh, maybe I shouldn't?
Yeah, you know at a certain point the guys that have the ability, like perfect example, Matt Olson, right? Matt Olson is one of the most gifted first basemen I've played with. Like his ability to pick balls that nobody else picks, to stay on the base, his size, his length, his flexibility freed up so much confidence in trying to make plays and throws that you might otherwise get tight and then make a worse throw because of it, because you're trying to be too precise.
Yeah, I could see that. So then that's going to be something that's going to be really hard to sort of pin down in the numbers.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a pick, there maybe that's a new statistic. You can go pick rate at first base, right? The number of balls in the dirt to the first baseman that they pick.
Yeah. I think the nice thing though, and I've seen this in other places, you build your team in free agency and you have trouble with defense. We just talked about this was the Mets on Tuesday with Tim Britton, where, that's a veteran team with veterans everywhere. It's kind of hard. Like, first of all, if you're a team that spends a lot, you have a high bar for entry. And so you have to be a really good player to even make the squad. And then, you have to be a really good player that plays center field or shortstop. And you might be the guy who pushes Lindor off a shortstop. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, it's all fraught with like this nervous energy, and also defense peaks early. So you're not, if you're building in free agency, you're signing Brandon Nimmo to a long extension. He's not going to be your center fielder for most of that extension. Right. And the nice thing about what the Orioles have done is that they have built through the draft, and they have young players coming up. So I'm not actually that worried about their defense. I think Rutschman is a great defender. I think Gunnar is really good for where he is now. Holiday's a future shortstop playing second, a former shortstop playing second. Westberg is a former shortstop playing third. I think Kaiser can play center. Maybe center is a little bit of a pain point for them, but they went and got Dylan Carlson just to basically be a backup center fielder. Gave the money to Tyler O'Neill. He's not a great outfielder, but I don't think he's a DH yet. So this is a good defensive team. And it seems like the biggest opportunity, if you're not Basallo and hitting your way onto this team, is in the outfield. They're bringing up Dylan Beavers as well. When I did the comp list on Dylan Beavers, it wasn't quite as good. He has a 40 degree swing tilt, which is on the higher end, and then around league average bat speed. So we've talked about how like Judge is so special because he has all that tilt, but also great bat speed. It's kind of hard to have great bat speed. It's a little bit easier to have great bat speed if the bat just comes straight out of your body. When you have that tilt, you're involving your back. It's hard to have as much swing speed. So his comps are Drew Waters, Brandon Marsh, Dylan Dingler, And if he adds a little bit of bat speed, a little bit higher as Eugenio Suarez and Andy Pages, I mean, it's not without some upside. There's some interesting guys there. Maybe if he ended up a Brandon Marsh, that would actually be a decent outcome for this team, because you'd have a lefty hitting guy who could play some center, is a good defender, gets on base, runs. Actually, I think Brandon Marsh might be my favorite comp for Dylan Beavers. I don't know what you saw when you took a look under the hood.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I do think it feels like there's a little bit more in there in terms of power than Brandon. I mean, I think that you look at like we said, the good bat speed, but not elite. But then you look at, a 21% K rate in the minors, 14% walk rate. I said earlier, nobody cares what you did in the minor leagues, but it's a window into who you are. The other thing that's interesting to me too is the kid has an 82% success rate on stolen bases with 87 stolen bases in the minor leagues. If you look at Chandler Simpson, for example, who everyone say has elite speed and stolen base, he's only at 86% in minor leagues. So the kid can run probably maybe more than even his sprint speed suggests. And I haven't
seen a smart runner, right? Yeah, because he's only at 55 speed in Fangraphs.
Yeah, but I mean, here, like I said, here's a kid that in the minor leagues, 87 stolen bases with an 82% success rate, and Chandler Simpson is at 86%. So, I think there's something there. He's getting. I always look at like one extra base hit per 10 at bats as somebody who can drive the baseball, and he's doing that in the minor leagues. And then I look at the depth chart and, the outfield with Kowser, O'Neill, Carlson. I mean, Dylan Carlson is an interesting one. I mean, here's a guy who kind of came up and showed a really advanced approach early on and just, has kind of lost it.
I think that's like a low end comp for him. That would be, I think that's a possibility for Beavers because you're talking about good walk rate, good strike, like good at everything, but not great at anything. That's sort of where Carlson started.
Yeah, right. That's a fair point. And we'll see it from a depth chart perspective. Like, Dylan, if he gets tendered this offseason or not, he might not even be on this roster. We'll see. So, I think there is I think there's a case to be made that, Beavers can get that spot and be successful. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Orioles, depending on their budget, went out and looked at another outfielder, maybe not a high-end outfielder because they get some pitching that they need to address as well. But Beavers is a guy that looks like he can be productive in my estimation. Maybe not the high-end guy, but a guy that is going to be productive should be productive for a while if he can maintain that bat speed and the discipline at the major league level.
Yeah, and I think this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this looks like a really great team. I think this is a really good offensive team. When I look at the Bat X projections, they basically have 9 guys that are league average or better. The Oopsie projection is even more rosy with 11 guys that are league average or better, and Basallo with already being projected for being 10% better than league average. So this is a really deep, a really deep lineup. They don't really seem to me to have any needs offensively. Like I could just go with this lineup into next year and feel pretty good about it. I wouldn't have to spend any money on it. The obvious question, of course, is, on the pitching side, but I think that they'll have some money. I don't want to speak for an owner, but right now the before all the arbitration rages, which are going to be big, they're going from 180 to $40 million in salary. Now that's they're going to have arbitration for Mountcastle, Rogers, Aiken, and Carlson. Gunnar hits his first year of arbitration. So there's going to be some big numbers there, but if it's $40 million or whatever, or $50 million, they're still going to have, they may have 50, 60, $70 million to spend in free agency, losing. And yes, they're losing Eflin and Sugano. But I think that those are the types of players that they can replace. I don't know though. And let me just pull this up real quick. If they're ever going to spend at the top of the MLB of the free agent pitching market, and just so that people know who that is this coming year, the top of the market is Fromber. Oh, I would love that for them.
Yeah,
wouldn't that be such a good one? He's so high floor, I feel like.
Well, and the only teams in the American League who have given up more runs than the Orioles are the Angels and the A's. You just can't. I mean, they've given up 611 runs so far this year. The offense is, they've had a lot of injuries. They've had some, Adley has not had the same offensive year that he has in the past. I mean, Gunner's not having he's still being very productive, but not the same guy.
But if they had better pitching, they would have even had a better year this year. I mean, I think they could be in the wild card race if they had better.
Yeah, pitching. I mean, they've scored 547 runs despite all of the injuries and middling performance in terms of
how's that rank?
Guys. 547. I mean, it's kind of right in the median. I would say it looks like about 7. I mean, you're talking about the Yankees, Blue Jays, Red Sox, all above 600 right now.
Okay,
and the Tigers,
but I think they
600.
can score 600 next year. Like Gunner healthy all year.
At this point in the season at least. It's really hard to win games consistently when you're bottom 3 in your league for runs allowed.
Yeah, I think you have to give them credit for Trevor Rogers. They've done a great job with Trevor Rogers. They've added a sweeper. The sinker looks a little different. So I may have been wrong about Trevor Rogers. And so, he's obviously a part of what they're doing next year. And Dean Kramer and Cade Povich are fine sort of middle guys. Kyle Bradish, we're just gonna have to see what he is. I like Young, but I don't think he's an ace. I just think putting like Fromber at the top of this and making everybody push down a seat would just be so good. And if the years are a problem, because Fromber is going to get a lot of years, I think, because he's been healthy and he's been good every year. I think Fromber might get a lot of years. If the years are a problem, maybe Dylan Cease will get fewer years because he's been so up and down. I could see spending on Dylan Cease. Freddie Peralta has a club option. I don't think he's going to be out of the market. And Chris Sale has a club option. Shane Bieber would be an interesting one. Of course, we have to see what he looks like post surgery and what the stuff looks like. But if Shane Bieber pitches well down the stretch for Toronto, I could see that making sense for them if they want to be like, hey, we only do 4 or 5 year deals here. We're not giving a pitcher 6 or 7 or anything. Then that's going to price them maybe out of Fromber. I think Fromber's going to get a 6-year deal.
Yeah.
But I would like to see them spend there. In any case, I think the Orioles can be a wild card team next year, even if they don't get Fromber. But I think it'd be a little bit healthier for them going forward if they did find the right pitcher. I just think always of those Nationals teams where they had this great young batting core, and then they were like, hey, we're just going to add Scherzer and like Corbin and Strasburg. Yes, some of those deals were bad, but they won it all, you know. And then you swallow your pills and you lose. You have a couple of years where you're like, oops, it would be really great to not be spending $30 million on Patrick Corbin or Strasburg right now. But that's the price of entry. And I think if they can just, swallow that, like, hey, maybe we're going to have one bad contract on here at some point if we do this, but we want to win it all. I think that would be a healthy change for them. But in any case, I think this lineup looks really great. I'm still excited about this team going forward.
Agreed. Young guys who are starting to mature, who are starting to, they're kind of earning their stripes, so to speak, through some failure at the major league level. Those experiences, I ultimately think they lead you to a better place if you can manage it, right? And that's that there is an if in that sentence. But I think when you're talented, as talented as these guys are, I think those failures actually make you better in the long run.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think about Jackson Holiday. Like you're like a Holiday family member. You're anointed. You're a top draft pick. Like you've like just killed it all the way through the minor leagues. I think the best thing that can happen to you is you come up and get hit in the mouth and have to think about things a little bit. So we interviewed him here on this podcast in the spring, and he was just he was a really great kid. So I think that he's got his head on straight. But, all of them failing a little bit collectively, too, is something that they will remember collectively, and that'll make it so much sweeter when they together. This is a little bit like the bumps the Royals underwent when they were a young team that was coming together. Maybe something that the Red Sox are going to be learning through this course of this year, as those are teams that I think of. The Royals team that won the World Series, they all came up together. This Red Sox team is coming together in a similar way. They're earlier in the process. The Orioles, to me, like they've had the failures. They're ready to launch. So that's how I see it. I think I could see them, really turning heads next year. But that's it for us today. I hope I did all the segues right. I hope I did DVR proud. He's fine. He just had some stuff he had to deal with. He'll be back, thankfully, to take this yoke off of my shoulders. It is such a heavy burden. But Jed, you helped a lot along the way. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
To everybody out there, you can join our Discord. The link is in the show description. And we're discussing right there where I will be this weekend in Chicago at nights. There's a couple bars I'll be at on Friday and Saturday nights. I'll be at the Sabre Seminar. I encourage anybody with the means to go check it out and go do it, because I will be presenting there some research that we did for Stuff Plus, but also there's all sorts of cool presentations about different facets of the game. So I really recommend that if you have the ability to do that. Otherwise, maybe come find me out on the town, Chicago. That's in the Discord. Like this video, subscribe it, and thanks for listening.
Thanks.